Hey guys, welcome to the Journey of Ruth Discipleship podcast, where we encourage listeners to love Jesus, study his word, and reach others. I'm your host, Courtney Lohman. My guest today is Bobby Harrington. Bobby is a lead pastor, author, disciple maker coach, and trainer of other leaders. He's led churches in his hometown, Calgary, Alberta, and the Nashville area. He completed his Doctor of Ministry at Southern Seminary. Dr. Harrington is the point leader of Renew.org and the executive director of Discipleship.org. If you have never visited Discipleship.org, you are missing out on a treasure trove of resources for all disciple makers. It is one of my favorite websites. Dr. Harrington and I chat about the importance of a clear definition of discipleship within every local church and ministry. We talk about trends he's observed in the area of disciple making within church culture today. And we discuss some shocking outcomes that Discipleship.org discovered in the National Disciples Making study they did alongside Exponential. This episode is so good. In fact, it's one that after I recorded it, I texted a few friends and I said, oh my gosh, I have to tell you how amazing this conversation was. Now, before we dive into this great conversation, this Friday, I'm going to be sending out our monthly inside look to all of the listeners who have signed up. This one, more than ever, has some really, really big news in it, and you don't want to miss it. So our inside look is packed with valuable insights and information for listeners of this podcast. If for some crazy reason you haven't signed up yet, or maybe you just found us and you're just learning about this valuable resource, make sure you head over to journeyofruth.com/newsletter today to sign up for the inside look. Now, a preview of something that's in the inside look is an opportunity for you to be on the Journey of Ruth podcast. Every week, I ask the same final question, and it goes like this. Because we're not meant to live life alone, who is it that helped you along in your journey? I feel like it's an opportunity to recognize the people that have helped us get where we are in our life. It's the chance to say thank you and a chance to recognize what they've done for us. Well, now it's your turn. Maybe as you've heard me ask that question time and time again, you've thought about what your answer would be. Maybe you've also wanted to be on a podcast. Maybe you've always wanted a cool way to say thank you to that person that has made such an impact in your life. Well, here is your chance. So I've set up a phone number for you to call and leave a 1-minute message with your answer to our final question. All you have to do is call 602-935-0369. And there you can leave your name and answer the question. Now, I know a minute is very short, so you might want to think about what you're going to say before you call, but we want to share several of them on the podcast, so we want to keep the answers short. On September 11th, I am going to be playing several of your answers on a very special episode of The Journey of Ruth. Now, why is that episode so special? Well, I'm going to let you know that in the inside look this Friday. Once again, that number is 602-935-0369. Call and leave a message and tell me who's helped you along in your journey. Write it down, look in the show notes, press pause, and call 602-935-0369. Now on to this very special episode with Bobby Harrington. Well, Bobby Harrington, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Courtney.
Yes, I am so glad to have you here. You are the CEO of Discipleship.org. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's titles are funny to me, but yeah, I'm the CEO.
The guy in charge.
I'm the guy in charge.
Perfect. There you go.
All the mistakes are my fault.
Oh boy. Yes, that's the fun thing about being in charge, right? You get to take all of the victory, but then you also have to take all of the things that don't work out. So absolutely. Well, I'm excited. I was introduced to discipleship.org during COVID, and you guys did a conference online. I was able to listen in on that, and I really was encouraged because I think sometimes discipleship can feel a little bit like a lonely space. I can feel like, is anyone else around me participating in discipleship sometimes? And when you find a location where whether it's online or in person, where there's people that are just as passionate about discipleship as you are. I don't know. It just makes my heart flutter. And I was so glad to find discipleship.org, not to mention all of the amazing resources that you guys have for us. So we're going to get into some of those. Can you introduce listeners to yourself and to discipleship.org?
Well, sure. So, it's funny. Here's how I'll do it. So I'm a person who became a follower of Jesus. My identity was changed by Jesus as a university student at the University of Calgary in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, where I grew up.
Okay.
And since that time, I've tried to live for him. I was very fortunate. I didn't realize it at the time, Courtney, but my French professor discipled me into Christ and discipled me with a foundation of what it meant to follow Christ. And so one of the things that I found, in fact, I was thinking about you before the show started, about your story, because here's what I have found. Typically, those who are most passionate about disciple making were in fact discipled.
Yeah, that's true.
And so because of that, that's kind of their passion and desire that other people would do that, because it's so helpful, so life-changing, so empowering to have been discipled, that we just want that for other people. Of course,
it just makes sense, because that's the way it went for them. Why wouldn't they help that other people reach that? Yeah. So
I've been married to Cindy for 43 years, which is amazing. I never thought about that. We have 2 children, and I'm so grateful to God that they follow Jesus, and they're raising their children to follow Jesus, discipling their children. And, of all the things in my life, I'm most grateful for that, and that my parents follow Jesus. So no matter what happens to me, I really am a fortunate person, because for my life and the lives of those that matter most to me, they follow Jesus.
Yeah. Now, you're very busy, because not only are you a husband and a dad and a grandfather, but you're a pastor and a writer, and you are the guy in charge of discipleship.org. Am I right? All of those things all at once?
Yeah, it's you couldn't set out to do all the things that I do, but in God's providence, he's given me good teams and good leaders. And so in the church, is a church that my wife and I planted 25 years ago. And then, of course, we raised up the people. And so they can, we have really good leaders. So I'm only involved like 15 hours a week at that. Then I lead discipleship.org and another organization called renew.org.
Yeah. I mean, that's so much. But what I hear you saying is that community is really important, and that the church isn't just about one person, but it's about the body of Christ working together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The healthiest communities are communities with multiple leaders. In my opinion, it's hard to do because of various, reasons and, all that. But we're in a season for the last 7 years where we're really able to have team leadership, and it's working well. So we'll stick with it while it works.
I love it. So tell us a little bit about discipleship.org. How did it come to be? Why is it there? And what can we find when we go visit?
Sure. Thank you for asking me that. So discipleship.org simply champions Jesus-style disciple making. So where did it come from? It came from some experiences that I had with the church we started, and then I was training church planters. And when we were doing that, I realized that there was a shallowness in the lives of many people in the church where I was the lead guy, and in the churches that we were planting. And in God's providence, he led me to develop a relationship with Jim Putman, who's a big discipleship guy, disciple making guy. And Jim really just drew me back to two things that God had already put in my life. One was I had been really well discipled. And secondly, I had been persuaded by Robert Coleman's book, The Master Plan of Evangelism.
I love it.
Which is the gold standard on Jesus' method of disciple making. I had been persuaded by that book within 3 years of being baptized, but the church systems I was a part of weren't based on that.
Correct.
So Jim Putman helped me to go back to what I had experienced and what I believed to be true. And then we retrofitted our church around those concepts, started training church planters in those concepts. And then it really just led to a conviction. We wanted other churches and other church leaders and ministry leaders to really be encouraged and get the tools they needed to champion Jesus-style disciple making in their own lives. Yeah. So that's what discipleship.org does. If you can go there, discipleship.org is the methods of Jesus for disciple making. Lots of good stuff there. Yeah. And then if you're looking for teachings, I will encourage people that renew.org helps with, clear thinking on what the Bible actually teaches.
I love it. I love those, kind of different perspectives. And I know on both sites, you have just so many resources that are available to go and look at, books that are short ebooks that are written that are, I think, packed full of information, but just a real, I don't want to say easy read, because I think it's short, because if it was long, people wouldn't be able to handle the amount of information in it, Instead, it's like, here's enough for you to be able to take this now, think about it, chew on it, and apply it in your own life.
That's right.
Which I love. One of the things that is available on your website is a study that you guys did along with Exponential. And the name of the study is the National Study on Disciple Making in USA Churches: High Aspirations Amidst Disappointing Results. And they always say you got to come up with a catchy title, right? And so you catch that subtitle and you're like, uh-oh. I got to go and I got to look at this study. And I'm going to encourage any leaders to go and look at that study and look at the results. I think your guys' information in that study, along with the study that Barna did alongside the Navigators, it's showing the same information. It like two separate studies showing the same statistics, the same ideas, that discipleship is not happening in churches in America. Some people think it is. In fact, before we even pressed record, we were talking about a church, and you said, "Are they a disciple-making church?" And my answer was like, I know people that go there that are passionate about discipleship. Are they a disciple-making church? I don't know. So one of the things that it says in the study is that leaders didn't have a clear understanding of just how much discipleship was or wasn't happening in their congregation. And they often overestimated their church's discipleship impact.
Yeah.
Why do you think this is happening?
So let's get down to the heart of the issue in terms of what we're talking about. How we think about things, what we believe is reality really impacts us. And one of the things that's really important in how we think about things and how we perceive reality are the definitions that we use.
Good.
And so if I think that discipleship is this broad, undefined thing, then I can make everything discipleship. So, for example, in the study, when we surveyed pastors, their definitions of what discipleship and disciple making is are all over the map. And because there's no clarity on that, then they put into those categories things that aren't discipleship, at least not primary discipleship. So, for example, if you have a church group that has fellowship together, maybe they're playing softball, is that discipleship? Well, the way things are defined, people are making that discipleship. Now, I can argue that having a softball game with a group of people can be a part of relational disciple making the way Jesus did it.
Yeah.
But there's an intentionality that would
is.
be a part of that interlaces and is the foundation of the whole thing. And
Yeah.
that's not what is happening. So when you can, here's one of the ways I describe it.
Yes.
In North America, discipleship is anything and everything. And ultimately, that means that it's nothing.
Wow. Wow. I ask the experts that we have on, if they, because I have my own definition of discipleship, but you are right that I have asked. In fact, they did this at our church in our leadership. They asked them, the leaders and the deacons, to define disciple and discipleship, and every one of the leaders had a different definition, and that allowed them to understand as a leadership group, we need to define this better because we all need to have the same definition if we're going to be going in the same direction. Now, I try to say, okay, can you tell me as an expert, what is your definition of discipleship?
So I'm going to give you 3 definitions. Okay.
Okay.
And I'm going to be technical with you.
Okay.
One of the things that I think is really important is I want to define Bible things by Bible terms and by Bible verses.
Okay.
Because otherwise I'm just inventing it. Like
That's right.
You know what I mean? So as much as I can, I want to have biblical references and language.
Yeah.
So the word discipleship is not in the Bible.
Correct.
So the word discipleship literally means the state of being a disciple. So if you do a concordance search or whatever it is, you're not going to find the word discipleship in the Bible. So I always start by saying that. Okay. So then that means, okay, well, what words are you going to use? By the way, the leadership of your church did a great thing by pointing out that everybody defines it differently. One of the first things I do with church leaders is we really work on definitions, because if you're going to try to accomplish something, you need to be really clear about what you're trying to accomplish.
That's
and if
right.
you don't have a good definition of a disciple and of disciple making, you're not going to do very well at creating disciples and being about disciple making.
Yeah.
So what we do is we use Matthew 4:19, and here's what the English Standard Version says. Jesus said to them, come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. So what we see in there is a good framework to ground it in Scripture, to ground it in the call of Jesus. I'm not saying that Jesus was giving a definition there, but I am saying that it's verses that help us to get close to the most biblical definition. So here's the definition of a disciple. A disciple is somebody who's following Jesus, being changed by Jesus, and joining the mission of Jesus. And you find that in that verse. So what we did with this, Courtney, let me just back up before I talk about what disciple making is. In 2005, when we were starting discipleship.org, I invited the heads of many national disciple making organizations to come to Nashville, and we actually hammered on these definitions.
Wow. Okay.
And what we did is we said, everybody can have their own definition, but when we're working together, can we agree on some common definitions that we're going to use?
Yeah.
So we defined disciple the way I just said. By the way, these definitions are on discipleship.org. If you go to the About tab, you'll find that the definitions are there. So the discipleship is simply the state of being a disciple. A disciple is somebody who's following Jesus, being changed by Jesus, and committed to the mission of Jesus. What is disciple making? And you pull together everything in the New Testament, and here is what I think is the most concise definition of what Jesus was asking us to do when he said, make disciples. It is intentionally entering into relationships with people to help them follow Jesus, be changed by Jesus, and join the mission of Jesus.
Yeah. And I think it's that we kind of end at entering into relationship with people. And that that's it, like we forget that there's an intentional part. And then there's the other, then there's what's your purpose. And I often get to find what's the difference between discipling and mentoring. What is the difference there? And my personal opinion is that mentoring with Jesus at the center is discipleship. But if you don't have Jesus, then mentoring, it's not a Jesus thing.
Let's talk about this for a second, because this is really, I think this can really help all of us. So there's a lot of literature out there on mentoring, of how people define mentoring. By the way, my light just went off there.
Is that what happened? You're good.
Okay. There's a lot of literature out there and a lot of books and courses on mentoring.
Yeah.
And the thing about that is they're secular or non-biblical categories. Now, some people try to make them biblical, and that's okay. But again, when you start using the word mentor, there's a word that's not in the Bible. And for clarity's sake, I just like the idea. Let's go back to scripture. And what did Jesus say? He said, make disciples. How did Jesus make disciples? Well, Robert Coleman laid that out, I think, really well. What's a good summary description of it? I think the idea of intentionally entering into relationships.
Yeah.
I'll talk to people about, was Jesus intentionally organic or organically intentional? And the answer is yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, really? Do we have to pick one?
But I really like I commend to you and everybody, the concept. We want to think biblically about it. And I much prefer disciple making to mentoring, because when it's disciple making and it's about Jesus, then I have a reference in terms of what Jesus did and how we can try our best to do what Jesus did. And if it's about making disciples, it's about much more than mentoring. It's about, the front end is leading people to place their faith in Christ through intentional discipling relationship. And the back end is helping people to become more and more like Christ, where they'll do what Christ did. But it's grounded in a scriptural framework, which mentoring, we just have to be transparent. It's not.
Yeah. So I would definitely agree with that. Now, here's where why I hear people say, I use the word mentoring and not discipleship. It's a marketing thing. It's because people don't have a definition of discipleship. And I have experienced this in my own ministry. I go in, I'm so excited because we're going to be offering this amazing discipleship conference, or we're going to be offering this, simulcast, and we're going to be watching. Oh, what is it about? It's about discipleship. And people are like, oh, that's not for me.
Yeah.
And,
I think,
but if I'm like, it's mentorship.
You're making a good argument that it's much more easier to market mentoring. So
people understand what that word means. They don't understand what discipleship means. So I mean, that is literally something in my ministry that I have chewed over multiple times. Do I use, this is the Journey of Ruth discipleship podcast. Should I use that word discipleship? And I have been encouraged multiple times by people I highly respect. You might want to reconsider using the word discipleship.
Several years ago, my son and I and a guy named Jason Hauser wrote a book on discipling your children, and we worked with Zondervan on it. And the guys, the team at Zondervan did not want us to use family discipleship because, of all the reasons we end. I mean, when you work with a book publisher, you got to listen to them.
Yeah.
We ended up calling the book Dedicated: Training Your Children to Trust and Follow Jesus. And it's the same thing that you're getting at. And I think that's regrettable. Part of me wants to be the official resistance and say, you know what, we're going to talk about disciple making.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
but
look at your website.
I understand your point. I
Yeah.
think I get it.
Yeah. You're like, nope, we're not coming with that with any other name, just discipleship.org. We don't need any other explanation. Let's just
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Okay, friends, are you signed up for the Inside Look yet? The Inside Look is our monthly newsletter where we let you know what's happening with the podcast. We start each month with a short devotional. Then we pack the rest with important information for you, the listener. When we need listener input for a future podcast, the questions and submission information are in the Inside Look. When we have an upcoming Patreon chat, information, it's in the Inside Look. So if you haven't signed up for the newsletter yet, make today the day. Head over to journeyofruth.com/newsletter and sign up so you don't miss any of the exciting things coming in the Journey of Ruth community. I want to know from you what it looks like for a church to not just put discipleship into their pillars. I know, in fact, recently I did my own survey, and one of the questions was, is discipleship one of the core virtues at your church? Yes or no? And it was written. And I had several people circle yes or circle yes. I didn't have any room for comment. There was not supposed to be any comments, but they went ahead and wrote, but it is not acted upon. So yes, it is within our core values, but it is not acted, like they don't do anything to actually fulfill that. What does it look like for discipleship to be a strategic priority and not just something that we list in the core values, but something we actually live out in our church?
Yeah. Boy, this is a good question. I was going to go, I can give you a short answer or a bigger answer. I'm going to do the shorter, bigger answer.
Okay, great.
We have to realize that our systems of doing church in North America, we came at them from a historical period where we had many institutions in society that discipled people. So, for example, it was not that long ago that many of your older listeners would have been in schools where they actually had prayer in schools and things like that.
Yeah.
When they would have been children. You have institutions, even the Supreme Court, there's pictures of Moses with the 10 Commandments. And that you had a culture where a lot of discipling was happening in Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, schools, and all of that. And so what happened is churches were able to get by with you gather people, but you don't have to pour in the way Jesus did with his disciples, or so we thought.
Interesting.
Culture's changed radically since then.
Yeah.
And we live in a period of time today where the average person their minds have been discipled and their body habits have been discipled in the ways of the world. And just showing up for a church service and a shallow, small group is not going to out-disciple the world's discipling. And so I think people are waking up to it. And what's happening is that there's a revolution happening with thought leaders right now where they're ringing alarm bells saying, if we don't go back to Jesus-style disciple making, we're all in big trouble.
Yeah.
Now, the difficulty is that, again, a lot of people don't have clarity of thought on this. I wrote a book with a guy named Scott Sager, who teaches at a Christian university near where we live, called Disciple Making, the Core Mission of the Church, where we make the argument that the core mission of the local church is disciple making. Now, I have to explain what I mean by that.
Yeah.
Once we understand that a church, the core thing about a church is forming people into the image of God through relationships, through habits that unleash the power of the Holy Spirit, through the word of God. But that behind everything that we're doing Paul says it this way: we are all being transformed from one degree of glory to the other into the image of the Lord, which comes from the Spirit. That's 2 Corinthians chapter 3. Well, if you really believe that that's what the church is about, and I do, and we make that argument, well, then you've got to reorganize everything in the church around that core mission.
Yeah.
So it comes down to, one of the ways I sum it up, it comes down to, here's the core mission. We want to help people come to faith in Christ, and then we want to help them to grow up and become more and more like Christ. Everything in church at the end of the day is about that. Now, what does that mean? Well, when we come together in our preaching and praise and worship, we just need to be clear what the goal is in preaching, praise, and worship in our small groups and in everything. Once you become to that understanding, it does really affect things. It's not just about gathering crowds and hearing, where they get to hear sermons.
Yeah.
It's about, how are we going to form these people around the life of Jesus so that they live like him? And so Jim Putman and I wrote a book called Discipleship, which talks about how a church needs to, the 5 shifts that a church leadership need to take the church through so they shift to a disciple-making focus.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, I mean, I know the churches that I grew up in were very program focused. And one of the things that I've noticed is that discipleship is not program. It doesn't lend itself to like programs super well. And so that's really hard to make that shift that you're talking about, because it's not about a program, it's about a relationship. Yeah. And so that's a hard shift in a lot of churches.
Yeah. So one of the things that I do is I talk about how the average church today, and I can give you a background on why this is the case, but one of the ways you can sum it up is the 3 Ps. There's preaching, programs, and praise and worship. What's a good church? Well, who's the preacher? How good is he? What are the programs for me and my kids? And what's the praise and worship like? Yeah. Well, you know what? You can have a great preacher, you can have great praise and worship, and you can have great programs, but they may not be discipling people.
That's right.
So the church has to be repositioned around, how are we setting up relational environments? How is the church a system designed so that people experience intentional, relational disciple making, where they are led to Christ and then they are discipled to grow up in Christ? And it's 2 different operating systems.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. And I think if you, as a leadership, like come together and get behind this, in my opinion, because discipleship is an exponential model, it's so beneficial for the church. I know it's a hard transition sometimes, but I think what you find is that when people are being discipled, they are aware of what their spiritual gifts are. They're more willing to serve because they understand that that's a part of like what they've been created to do. They're excited about their own faith and the growth that they're experiencing, that they want to bring other people in because they're realizing, oh, this isn't just about me sitting here. It's about me learning so that I can go and reach others, following that 2 Timothy 2:2 model. And then your church begins to grow. I think it's, we go back to marketing. I'm like, discipleship is how you grow a church, not programs, and grow a church with people that will stay. And then when they leave, you're like happy they're leaving because they're leaving to go and minister in other locations.
Yeah. The difference is the realization that true disciples are handcrafted a few at a time. Yeah. They're not mass produced.
Right.
So much of what we're doing is we're trying to mass produce disciples of Jesus. But, there's so much deep work that has to be done that you can't mass produce them.
Yeah. Yeah. But if you have just a handful of people that are like doing 5 at a time, and I go to a large church. So I'm like, okay, what if they grabbed 50 of the leaders at the church and said, we want all of you to grab 5 people and disciple them? Oh my gosh, like that's 250 people that are being discipled, and it's not overwhelming to any one person, So
You're
when you
right.
think of it on those exponential type of numbers, I think you can break it down and see that it's not about a program where one pastor is standing up there and, trying to make disciples of these
Yeah.
people, but it's an
Now,
individual responsibility.
let me clarify something, because if you have a pastor listening, what I find is that pastors who are really effective preachers
Uh-huh.
often think that what we're saying is it's disciple making without preaching or preaching.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
but that's not it.
No,
Like, you want good preaching,
absolutely.
but you want to make sure that it's not all about good preaching.
Mm-hmm.
You want it to be about good preaching and disciple making. And to get both, there's going to need to be some negotiation and restructuring, but it can be done.
Yeah. Now, I'm sure there are some good trends going on in the church as a whole that you see are being really effective for discipleship. Can you share some of those, like, things that you're seeing in churches that are like grasping this and they have put them into place and you're like, this is having a really, truly great effect on the churches that
Well,
are using it?
well, I wish I saw more.
Okay.
Uh, now, I just want to say this, just to give context to this conversation. So in the United States, less than 5% of churches would be qualified as disciple making churches.
Yeah,
Where
that was in the study. That was very
yeah.
sobering for me to see. Yeah.
But here's the encouraging news. When you look around the world, more than 1% of the world's population is in disciple making movements, and they're only about 30 years old. So, for
Mm.
example, Curtis Sargent, who's an expert in this field, was a missionary to China in the early 90s, and has an incredible track record. Uh, you know, uh, like 3% of the Chinese population are involved in disciple making movements. We now know that 10% of the Chinese population claim to be followers of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
It's 7 or 8% of India now, with 3% of them in disciple making movements. And in disciple making movements, it's all about being disciples and making disciples. And the culture of these movements is that's how everybody thinks of it. They all think,
Yeah.
hey, I'm a disciple and I make disciples, is what we do. It's who we are. Well, we want that to come more in North America. And we're seeing some early signs of some of these viral disciple making movements.
Mm.
Now, let me tell you some of the key things that are a part of that. And I can get real practical for your listeners
Yeah, that'd be
on
great.
things they could focus on. Typically, what you're going to find is, first, there's going to be an environment of fasting and prayer and really seeking the Holy Spirit of God's leadership.
Mm.
And it's not just a passive one-off thing. It's going to become a deep-rooted thing that's
Mm.
connected with disciple making. So in disciple making movements around the world, by the way, the one biggest thing that would delineate what they do from what North Americans do is the way they fast and pray
Hmm.
for movement.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's one of the things that I'm seeing.
Wow.
And we've got some books. You can go to discipleship.org, and Dave Clayton's book Revival starts here, which is a introductory guide to fasting and prayer. So you've got that. The second thing is that the average everyday person has been equipped and empowered, and I'm going to pick my words carefully here, with a simple, effective, reproducible model.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is, might be Discovery Bible Study. It might be simple tools. It could just be we're going to read 25 chapters of the Bible this week and come back together and talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the key character traits of it. It's simple, so it doesn't require you got to read a bunch of books and get a bunch of training. It's
Yeah.
just simple. It's effective. It leads people to commit their lives to Christ or become more like Christ, and it's reproducible. Once you've been through it, you can go do it with somebody else.
Mm.
Okay. And then the last thing I'd say,
And can I
just
stop you right there? Where would you, that is the biggest thing that I hear is like, I mean, I hear you, Courtney. I hear you saying that discipleship is important, but what would I even do with somebody? So what you're saying is it's not that complicated.
Well, here's the thing. A lot of churches make it complicated,
Okay.
and it's a mistake. So
Hmm.
the driving thing, if you're trying to create a culture of disciple making, is you got to just ask again, 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 again. What is a simple, effective, reproducible model? Is this a simple, effective, reproducible model? So I created a model around a book called Trust and Follow Jesus. And I worked with a guy on a university campus, and it was really, really helpful. So he and his wife took this and they made it viral on the campus. And but he wants me to make some edits. I'm actually just working with him right now on the edits because he wants it to be even simpler than it is,
Mm.
so that everyday average people, it's just easy for them to replicate it.
Yeah.
Because uh, once that happens, it's going to be 3, 4, 5 generations of people that you don't even know who they are, and they're actually being discipled because of
Yeah.
the reproducible model that you set up. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think having that and one thing that I've encouraged people is that you don't have to create anything.
Ah,
I've also heard like, well, I don't have the spiritual gift of teaching. I'm like, you don't have to even be a teacher. Walk through a book with somebody, maybe one that really touched your life, and walk through that book with somebody, or walk, through the first part of the book of John. That's the one I've heard probably the most, is walk through John with somebody, you know, and see what God brings to mind.
there's different ways to do it.
Yeah.
Let's just say that. But I think the smartest thing a person can do is to get that simple, effective, reproducible model, and then just train people in it and make it a thing where everybody knows is what we do here. This is
Yeah.
how we, because um, it's got to be the average person doing it
Mm.
for it to be really transformative and effective.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Okay. So we've talked a lot about in the church, and that was on purpose, because I think a lot of times we talk about one-on-one discipleship and what that looks like. And then I think the reason why we don't talk a lot about church discipleship is because no one knows what discipleship looks like in the church, like we discussed earlier. But someone that listening is like, okay, great, Courtney, like I'm not a church leader. I'm not a pastor. So what is my role in all of this? Like what part can I play in seeing disciple making in my church and seeing a worldwide culture of discipleship begin to grow?
Yeah. So I think this is really an important question. I think it was Mark Twain that said everybody thinks of changing the world, but nobody thinks of changing themselves.
Mm,
And the idea is that it starts with me. Like
mm,
when I start working with a church leader, the first thing I do is I say, it's got to start with you. Like, don't talk to your church about making disciples until you're making disciples who make disciples. Like, get it going in your own personal life. And
mhm.
oftentimes I'll meet people and they're real frustrated with their church leadership. And I'm like, don't worry about them. Worry about you. Like,
Yeah.
let's start with you. So everybody, in my opinion, I guess you should always be careful not to say everybody, but the vast majority of people, the first most important thing they need to do is carve out 5 hours a week, get 3 to 4 people in a group. It can be 2 people. I do think one-on-one is not as reproducible as say 1-on-2 or 1-on-2 to 4.
Okay.
But get them in a group, start meeting weekly, and uh, just like get in the game. So like tonight, it's interesting. My wife has a group of women coming over. We call them transformation groups. Short version is T groups.
Okay.
And, we have a model. It's a reproducible and effective model. It's simple enough. I think it could be simpler, but tonight they're really getting going because she met with them. She talked what the group was going to be about. There's a covenant because we've learned, at least in our community, when people make a covenant, the group's going to go much more effective. The
Yeah.
covenant is here's what we're going to do in the group. Here's what we're going to do when we can't make it. Here's how we're going to be committed to it and so forth. Well, I told her this morning, I'm just so proud of her because she's got these 4 women that she's investing in for the next year. And they meet every Wednesday night from 5 to 6:30, and Cindy's discipling them. And it's, we're not changing the world. She's just changing the world for these 4 women
Yeah.
because she's investing in them.
So what happens in a year? I always say it's great to have a, like a timeline, right? To not be like, okay, if I'm going to disciple this person, they're now in my life for the rest of their life. But for you guys and your idea on how you run your model, what happens in a year?
So because we want it to be multiplicative, because there's so many people that need to be discipled, and because it's God's heart. So we start pregnant, we reiterate in the middle, the multiplication, and then we set everybody for it up in the end. So let me describe what I mean. The average person gets in a group, and for a lot of people, it's like water to thirsty souls. Mm-hmm. And they have a group and they love the group and they get to know and love people, and they don't want to multiply.
Yeah.
A lot of people, this is the first time they've had real relationships.
That's right.
But what we have learned is that it's in God's eyes, it's really important. And so we do a couple of things. The first thing is that when we start the group, we make it a part of the covenant that this group's going to multiply. Like, we're going to be together for a year and we're going to multiply. And everybody commits to that up front. Okay. Now, most people are committing to it and they're not fully conscious of what that means, but we do our best. But then here's where it becomes really important. Halfway through, we do a pause and we talk to everybody about, hey, isn't this great? We just want to say that it's God's heart that we multiply, and we're halfway through and be praying about we're going to invite to be a part of the group that you're going to be a part of when we multiply. And then about a month before the end, you come back to it again and you get everybody ready, so that when you do it that way, I have found you can multiply. Now, we also do something else. We don't send everybody off into 4 different groups or 5 different groups. We might send 2 or 3 people out to start the next group, and then 2 of us will get some other people and we'll do it again, so that there is a continuity with some of the relationships, so that you're not totally starting fresh every time.
Yeah. Do you feel like sometimes you have people that aren't ready? What do you do if you've got someone who you're like, and it's not really your judge. You're not the judge, I guess. But, like, I don't know if you're ready. Why don't you stay with me for another year? Or they're like, I'm literally not ready and I'm not sure what to do.
I think that's right. That's going to happen. One of the things that in the type of discipling relationship that I'm talking to you about, these micro groups, which I do think are the most effective ways to do it. I've just learned, by the way, that for a lot of people, just in terms of efficiency, to go for these micro groups, but you typically only want to invite people into the micro group if they're ready. We call them FATSOs: faithful, available, teachable, sendable, and obedient.
So you just added to that. I've taught that before, that you want a fat disciple, and it's the worst term you can use in women's ministry ever. And you're like, let's just add fatso in there. Yeah. That's awesome.
That's true. There's different ways of saying it, but you want to get people who are dependable type people, reliable people.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you just get super frustrated. But you're still going to have people who are not ready. And you just pray about it and work with what you've got.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you. I think those are some great encouragements there, especially right at the end, of like, what can we do? What does that look like? I even love your encouragement of like, don't wait for other people to do it for you or to make a plan. Like, go, you're called. You are called. So go and do this and start it now. Yeah. And then see who see who's watching, see who
Yeah.
sees what you're doing, and is like, how do I do this? I wanna do this as well. Where can we find out more information? Discipleship.org, renew.org, is that correct?
Yeah. So you've got tools on the methods of Jesus on discipleship.org. The T group model, you can go to renew.org ebooks, and it's called Starting a Transparency Group from Scratch.
Okay.
And if somebody's listening and they saying, well, okay, I'm ready, I'll do that. Give me a model or a manual. If you'll go to renew.org, Starting a Transparency Group, it might be Starting a Transparency Group Quick Start Guide. Look for the word transparency group, and they'll tell you how to do it.
Fabulous. Awesome. Well, we have one question we ask at the end, and that is, because we're not meant to live life alone, who has helped you along in your journey?
Oh, so many people. I talked about Mac Jacobs, my French professor who discipled me. I'm so grateful for that. You know, my mother, even though she wasn't a devout Christian, she really discipled me and helped me along. I have a great wife. I've had really good friends and coworkers. Some of my university and seminary professors. I could go on and give you a long list.
And that's amazing to have so many wonderful names on that list that have helped you along. And that's encouraging, you know, because I know there are many people who can do the same. And so thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your encouragement, I think, to church leaders, but also to, you know, us as believers, and for, you know, you're not just preaching this. You're like, hey, here's a bunch of tools that you can use in order to take your next step. So thank you for all that you do.
Hey, Courtney, thank you. And I'm so proud of you and what you're doing, and just want to encourage you to keep going. You're doing great.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You know, I think that this episode is going to be so affirming for the Journey of Ruth community. There are many of you that are already practicing the things that Bobby is talking about, and yet, can't we always find areas to improve? What's one encouragement that you're taking away today? If you loved this conversation, take a screenshot of the episode, tag us, and share it with your friends. Bobby has so many good things to say. Remember, you know people that I don't know that need to hear this episode. Maybe they just started discipling someone. Maybe they're thinking about stepping into a discipleship role, but they're feeling ill-equipped. Well, share this episode with them so that they don't miss out. You can find all the links to discipleship.org and their socials over in the show notes on our website, journeyruth.com. And don't forget to check the show notes on your device and on the website for the phone number to call in and answer our final question in your own words. While you're at the website, take our discipleship survey to help with my upcoming book, and check out the speaker page if your group or Bible study is in need of a speaker. Send me a message and let's start chatting about your event and how I can serve your group. Finally, head over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the show, and subscribe over on YouTube. That allows people that neither you or I know to find the podcast. I'll see you guys in 2 weeks for a very, very special episode of the Journey of Ruth Discipleship Podcast.